Strap yourselves in. It's gonna be a long un.
Maybe if you don't want to talk, you could just listen.
Alright gang, what is happening? You are listening to the latest episode of your third favourite, above average, but infinitely curious and, believe me, infinitely frustrating to put together podcast, DIMED out. Yeah, I'm having one of those days where I'm trudging along, I'm making myself do this, but honestly, I don't know why. I truly am my own worst enemy. Maybe you can relate, I hope not. But if you can, this episode is probably going to resonate with you and ring a couple of bells, to say the least. We're going to be talking about performance. Let's try that again. In the spirit of this episode, let's try that again. Take 2. This episode is going to be about performance and perfectionism. The latter is one of my most key elements regarding self-sabotage. It is one of the things I do the most that corrodes me. It kind of motivates me, but it also kind of destroys me as well. I talked about a couple of episodes ago the idea of letting go of some of the expectations that I put on myself to make this, and to make it as good as I think it possibly can be, and just sort of embracing the whatever. Well, today is kind of giving you a peek behind the curtain of how bad that's going. Of how embracing the whatever is really, really difficult for me, and I don't know why. I think it is partly down to my OCD, and I feel like in things that I make, I have to have so much control over it. And I'm trying, emphasis really hard on that word, emboldened and underlined, trying, not very well, but trying nonetheless to let go of some of that need for complete and total control and power over the things I make and do. So today we're going to be exploring that a little bit, and I'm going to be exploring that whole minefield and diving into a little bit of the behind the scenes, I guess, of how this is going. Going being the operative word, because it isn't finished. It's still very much a messy work in progress, but I thought I would kind of show you how the sausage is mangled. I'm also going to be talking about performance as well, because that is something that seeps throughout this show and any podcast that you listen to or any content that is being created. There is definitely an element of performance to it, a huge element in terms of performing to be engaging to an audience and to make whatever it is you are creating to be palatable as much as possible, and I really wrestle with that. I struggle with it, because I do want this to have an appeal. I do want people to obviously like this. It's not the forefront of why I do this. I don't do this for the clicks. I don't ask you to... I don't do this for the clicks. I don't do this for the clout. I don't do this for you to smash that subscribe button and all that shit. I do it because I just feel the need to make stuff, and that's it. But I want that, really, ultimately that is it. And if people like what I make, that's a bonus. If they don't, I'll just move on to the next thing. But there is definitely an element of performance, but I'm trying to shed that a little bit And I think the reason I'm kind of opening up myself and some personal subjects with this season is to kind of shed that and let in a lot more authenticity. I think there will always be an essence of character in terms of the presentation with this, but I don't want that to become the dominant person within the work. I just want to be more myself. Anyway, let's dive into this episode all about perfectionism and performance. And the best way to do that is to detail, very randomly, a pretty disturbing dream I had. As I was getting into bed, getting ready to do some writing, as I was getting ready, I was reminded of just an absolutely awful, intense dream that I had last night. I was back in my old childhood home in Carlisle, and my mum was there, and it was just me and her, and I was at the very bottom of the stairs, and in our old house, it was 3 stories up. My bedroom used to be in the attic, and I'm stood at the bottom of the stairs, and I can hear her voice calling from upstairs. But the weird thing is she stood right beside me, and this voice, which is unmistakably hers, keeps yelling down the stairs for me to come up to her. And then it gets really intense from there, because it's like cries of pain and agony and just pleading for me to come upstairs. And it's all in my mum's voice, but my mum is stood there next to me and she doesn't know what's going on. And then just after like tussling with the weirdness of it and the obscurity and like the fear that was really beginning to get its hooks into me, this thing appears on the landing at the top of the stairs. The only way that I can describe it is that it's like some evil hag, witchy woman, kind of not a million miles removed from something you'd see in Evil Dead. It was terrifying because it just keeps coming down the stairs using my mum's voice, but now turning really nasty. I don't want anything to do with whatever the hell this thing is that's approaching me from the stairs. So we go outside, and to get outside of our old house, we had like this little vestibule thing with a door with a panel of glass in it, and then like this solid wood front door. And this hag thing, this just demon, is looking through the glass, and I am petrified. But for some reason, I decide to flip it off. I flip it the bird. I give the demon the middle finger, whilst, finding myself on the verge of pissing myself through fear. And then we hightail it in the car. We meet somebody who I've never met in my entire life, who I don't recognise, but in the dream she was like a long-standing friend of my mum's. She was driving us to get us out of there, just like basically getting as far away from the house as possible. And then it just kind of flips into something else completely. I'm in a travel lodge by myself, and there is a cat, not my actual cat who is ignoring me at the end of the bed here, but a cat. And I am still just absolutely shaking after this awful encounter. And then the cat turns to me and starts speaking in the same... And basically, from there, it just goes into really... I mean, the whole thing's inexplicable. But from that point, the cat slash demon slash whatever the hell is telling me that I need to see some things. It has some things to show me. And we then head off into what can only be sort of described as the backstage area of like a big sporting arena. Like the sort of hallways where you'll get your concessions, you'll go to the toilets, you'll go into the appropriate sections to go find your seat. It's there. And then it funnels into tiny little tight corridors, and it's full of people I've never met, didn't recognise. Just like my dream is auto-generating NPCs who apparently know me and are really pleased I'm there. And there's hugging, and there's celebrations, and there's congratulations, and there's just a jovial, happy happy-go-lucky attitude, and it's just absolutely mind-boggling. The dream then kind of spirals off into me trying to roll myself up into a ball of Play-Doh, and then there is a woman who's doing trust exercises, like trust falls, but with like massive sheets of Play-Doh. Yeah. I haven't the foggiest. But I've been thinking a little bit more about what it might mean. And I've been thinking a little bit more about making these vlogs and sort of documenting stuff and talking to whoever is eventually going to listen to this. And about the way I'm presenting myself. And it kind of links into one of the things I was talking about. One of the aims for doing this in the first place is to be able to let go of some of the control I've had making this show, and it also ties into my intent of being more authentic. There is a part, and you probably noticed, like I'm speaking more with my regional accent because I feel like, I don't know, just a bit more relaxed. When I've done the show in the past, there's been this sort of self-imposed pressure, and it falls back down into that realm of perfectionism to make it as good as possible. And for whatever fucking reason, in my head, it's like, well, you've got to have a presenting voice. You've got to project. You've got to be this type of person. And there is truth in the way that I present. Like, I am goofy and silly at times. That is just part of my inherent personality and nature. I'm not particularly a serious person a lot of the time, but when I am, I can be deeply serious and go real deep with stuff. But I am also just a bit of an idiotic goofball as well. However, watching some things back that I've made for this, it's dawned on me that I'm fucking performing. I am performing to what I think is acceptable or what people will like. And this ties back to the sort of end portion of the hag demon dream. Coming out the body of a cat, this demonic voice, which is a little bit like my mum's but then warps into something completely otherworldly, tells me that it's got things to show me, and then it takes me backstage at an arena, and it's full of people I don't know who are just being really nice and kind and just congratulatory and just sweet and just nice and comforting, and they're happy to see me and they're happy that I'm there. I think maybe, and again, I'm not a dream analyst at all. I have no sort of background field in this, no sort of history of real deep research into this, no qualifications. But I think on a basic subconscious level, what that part of the dream is me talking to myself about not performing, about not putting on this perceived character. It's not really a character, but this version of myself which is more palatable, which sounds more professional, that sounds more produced. That isn't me. That's never who I've wanted to be. I've never wanted to be somebody who is striving for adoration and adulation. I'm not someone that will be something I'm not, or do something I don't agree with just to gain favour or support or acceptance of other people. Not at my root. And I feel like maybe because I have abandonment issues due to my father leaving when I was a child, and I've had other issues in my adolescence of people turning on me, or people not being who I thought they were and kind of abandoning me and leaving me. I've maybe kind of adapted to being more of a people pleaser than I should be. More of a people pleaser than the root core of me would accept. I don't know. I'm thinking more about who I am along this. I know this sounds so fucking corny, but I am thinking more about who I am whilst I'm doing this, and it's actually pretty good for me, I feel. But I think that's what the tail end of that dream is. The sort of backstage, backslapping, everyone's happy to see me kind of thing. I think that's me trying to talk to myself and push myself away from this performative element. I don't need to retake shots for these vlogs, for these documentations. I don't need to get it until it's right. I don't need to put on a dog and pony show. If I'm in a silly, goofy mood and that's where it goes, yeah, fair enough. But sometimes, honestly, I'm not. And sometimes it is just a case of like, well, I've got to put my performing face on. And I don't want to fucking do that anymore. I don't think... I can, but I don't want to, and I shouldn't have to. So I'm trying to stop. I'm really... And it's going to probably be a process. But the fact that I'm conscious of it, and the fact that I'm consciously trying to make moves away from it, I think is a great thing. But it's not just a sense of performance within this podcast, it's a sense of performance in life. You know, being the smiley, happy person that people want to see, pretending everything is fine when a lot of the time it isn't. And I think that, more than anything in this episode, will probably resonate. The idea of putting on a front, wearing a mask, being somebody that you really aren't at the time for the sake of others. It can be draining, to say the least, and I'm trying to do that less as well. I'm trying to perform less in that sense, and not be afraid or ashamed for people to know that I'm not okay. Alright, so today is Monday the 13th of February, obviously the day before Valentine's, which is, you know, a monumental day for love and shitty greetings cards. I feel like I'm fucking performing. Just speak true. Don't need to put the fucking bells and whistles on. All in one take. Something that I've been doing... or trying to do recently, not even recently, I have had this thing, just fucking go. Oh, don't do retake after retake after retake, even if the ice maker is in fucking ice making mode. Just go. I've attempted to get into this on more than a couple of occasions. It has been start, stop, start, stop, start, stop, etc. It is a derailment. It is, again, another example of self-sabotage. But rather than kind of dig any further into this and be mean to myself for doing that, for not getting past day 3, rather than do that and lament on a sense of failure for the stop-start pattern, I'm starting again with the intent of getting further along this time. Oh, fuck me, just gonna start again. So, something that I have got here. No, fuck me. It was fine. I'm feeding into this. I'm feeding into the thing I want to break. Again and again and again and again and again. I just cannot let it be. It doesn't have to be fucking perfect. Nothing is perfect. So why do you set yourself these fucking unobtainable parameters? Why? How much fucking time have I wasted with 2 separate takes already? The first 2 were fine. I keep resetting myself on so many things, and it's just fucking sabotage. The biggest reset is gonna happen in a few episodes' time. Yeah, I'm not gonna tease that too much, but it is the biggest reset of my entire life, without question. We're also going to take a fairly deep dive into self-sabotage in an upcoming episode, but for now, let's dig into something that aggravated past me touched upon just a moment ago. Why? To even approach that question, first we need to look at what exactly perfectionism is. And to do that, here is a bunch of stuff that I pulled from psychology today. Perfectionism is a trait that makes life an endless report card on accomplishments. Do you know what? I'm just going to actually just use my notes. I'm not even going to try and make it seem natural. Perfectionism is a trait that makes life an endless report card on accomplishments or looks. When healthy, it can be self-motivating and drive you to overcome adversity and achieve success. When unhealthy, it can be a fast and enduring track to unhappiness. What makes extreme perfectionism so toxic is that while those in its grip desire success, they are most focused on avoiding failure, resulting in a negative orientation. They don't believe in unconditional love, expecting others' affection and approval to be dependent on a flawless performance. Perfectionism is... oh my days. Perfectionism... But what are the different kinds of perfectionism? According to this, from Psychology Today, there are 3 domains of perfectionism: self-orientated, other-orientated, and socially prescribed. Self-orientated perfectionism is imposing an unrealistic desire to be perfect on oneself. Other-orientated perfectionism means imposing unrealistic standards of perfection on others. And socially prescribed perfectionism involves perceiving unrealistic expectations of perfection from others. Essentially, all of this boils down into 2 categories: adaptive perfectionism and maladaptive perfectionism. Initially, my gut reaction to reading through this, and it's probably driven by want rather than genuine belief, my gut reaction was, well, I'm obviously an adaptive perfectionist. But then I read into it and got into what defines a maladaptive perfectionist. Maladaptive perfectionism is often driven by a fear of failure, feelings of unworthiness, low self-esteem, and adverse childhood experiences. It can also be driven by or lead to anxiety and eating disorders. Yeah, I really am putting the mal in maladaptive perfectionism. Having said that, of course, in terms of drive and motivation, I actually do kind of identify with the adaptive perfectionist. Adaptive or positive perfectionists set lofty goals, have high standards, and work relentlessly hard for their success. They are achievement-orientated, whereas maladaptive perfectionists are failure-orientated. Adaptive perfectionists desire growth, enjoy being challenged, and solve problems well. Their perfectionist tendencies are a strength, not a weakness. So, I don't know. I guess there's a little of column A, a little of column B to make this mixed up mongrel hybrid of perfectionism, fury, and fucking chaos. You know, whatever the hell is going on in here. Perfection, of course, is an abstraction, an impossibility. The dangers of being a perfectionist. Perfection, of course, is an abstraction, an impossibility, Oh my goodness me. Perfection, of course, is an abstraction. It's an impossibility in reality. When taken too far, the striving for perfection can lead to negative outcomes, like a tendency to avoid challenges, rigid all-or-nothing thinking, toxic comparisons, and a lack of creativity. They are quick to find fault and are overly critical of mistakes. They tend to procrastinate a project out of their fear of failure. They shrug off compliments and forget to celebrate their successes. Yeah, a lot of that rings true. A lot of that resonates. Procrastination, rigid all-or-nothing thinking. They shrug off compliments and forget to celebrate their successes. I feel seen and targeted at this point, reading through this stuff from Psychology Today. Anyway, that's enough about me for the time being. On a serious note, the more that I dig into perfectionism and performance and the various other elements that make up who I am, the various other things that have made me do the things that I've done, that make me do the things that I do, all the different strands and parts and compartments and pieces that make me, the more I dig into that, the more I excavate those things, the bigger the interest in them as a whole, not just from an interior standpoint as to how they pertain to me, but how they affect other people, the way that they've shaped other people's lives and perceptions. It really is just one continuous rabbit hole with various tangential sidetracks, and I'm curious to pull myself out of my own head and my own experiences and to dive into some other people's experiences. So that's exactly what we're about to do. Earlier this year, I had the absolute privilege and pleasure of chatting to
Jessica Parente
and
Rhiannon, but I go by Rhi.
about their experiences, and for that, I am very, very grateful. So, Jess is my age, and she is also the
founder of It Ends With You LLC. That is my business that I've been trying to grow, where I'm a trauma-informed coach. So I work with people on recovering from things like codependency and grief and any other life trauma that they may have. I'm also a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner.
Whereas Rhi is
24, obviously Australian, born and bred. I was diagnosed at the age of 3 with muscular dystrophy. I am a law graduate, a life coach, do a bit of public speaking, and I'm in the very early stages of starting my very own business.
Both of them not only fantastic conversations, which could have gone on for much longer had we had the time, but they were truly open and honest and transparent. It has also resulted in even more depth on this interesting topic of performance and perfectionism.
But you're not perfect either.
First and foremost, what would you define perfectionism as? Because earlier on in the episode, I've kind of looked at some of the clinical, analytical definitions of it. But to you, what would you define it as?
So perfectionism for me was my need to always do things, do the right thing in the right way. This idea of rightness, right? It became this compulsion and drive to go out into the world and prove myself, whether that's I'm going to be the best student, I'm going to be the nicest girl, I'm going to be the best friend, the best girlfriend. It became this obsession that I couldn't get myself out of, though I knew cognitively that I was not the best at those things. That internal drive, right? And that compulsion to, again, that sense of rightness. When I have things, when that part speaks to me, it's always this, are you doing it in the right way? Are you doing it in the best way? That, drive to do better, be better, act better, which I think is healthy for people who are want to grow and change. But when it becomes almost like a sympathetic response, a fight or flight response for you, and it's overtaking your entire way of being, that's when it becomes really detrimental. And when I look back, I was like that ever since I was a little girl.
I think I define perfectionism as the desire and the need to be 100% perfect in everything you do, how you conduct yourself, how you run a business, how you speak to people, how you act, and it shows up in almost every facet of your life if you're not aware of it.
Has that been the case for you, digging into your own experience with perfectionism?
Oh, very much so.
Yeah.
Very much so. I swear my middle name should be perfectionism. It pops up everywhere.
Do you know when you started sort of feeling or exhibiting sort of perfectionism as a personality trait?
Oh gosh, that is a good question. I honestly think I was a big people pleaser from a very early age. I think probably from, I want to say maybe 7, 8 years old. I didn't want to get into trouble. The idea of getting into trouble freaked me out, so I always tried to go on above and beyond to be the good student, the good daughter, the good granddaughter. So yeah, I think it's been around for a very, very long time, and I don't even know if there was a certain event that triggered it. I think I was almost just born that way.
One thing that really kind of interested me when corresponding with you was the phrase recovered perfectionist. How do you even begin that process, let alone reach the end of that one?
So, recovery is a journey, and it's a fluid word. So when I refer to myself as a recovered codependent or a recovered perfectionist, how I kind of quantify that is that the majority of the time spent in my life now is not giving in to those compulsions. And there's still small subsets, like those parts are always going to be with me. So there's times where that will creep in depending on, how challenging life is, what's going on, how much sleep I got. So it's just really my measure to say that those ways of thinking and how that dictated my life does not dictate my life anymore.
From your own personal lived-in experience with perfectionism, is it something that you feel has been applied from within? Like you've put those expectations, that drive to be the as best as you can in every department. Has that come from you, or do you feel that has come from like external factors, from whether that's family, friends, peers, classmates, workmates?
I honestly think it's a little bit of both, to be honest
Mhm.
with you. I think and I hate playing the disability card, like it
Yeah.
grinds my gears. But in society, there's still very much a bit of a stigma around what
Mhm.
disability is and how, someone with a disability contributes to society. And I feel like there's very much that external pressure as a
Right.
disabled person to go above and beyond and to be extra and to do everything better
Mhm.
than your able-bodied counterpart, so to speak. Yeah, I definitely think there's 100% an element of that, and needing to prove yourself as worthy to
Right.
be just a citizen, and as a human
Jeez.
being. The
Jesus.
because
That's
because the idea as a disabled person is you have to be an athlete,
mhm.
or you're either an athlete or you live on government pension, you don't work. Like that's sort of
Yeah,
but to fit into society, you have to be the role model, the up here kind of disabled person. So that sort of lends itself to where do you fit and how do I prove myself as,
right.
you know, a human.
Oof.
So being perfect in everything you do and excelling in everything you do plays a big part in every decision you make, every conversation you have, because you don't want to be pigeonholed at the same time as, oh, you're just
Mhm.
the disabled, human.
Yeah, that's awful to think that that's a thing. But the fact that you have those two poles, you are either, as you say, an athlete, like a like superhuman skilled person, or you are at the bottom end of the totem, and that's the two references most people have, or like a societal impression that people have, and that you have to kind of find yourself in the middle, showing that hey, there is plenty of space in between these two poles. It's not either or. There is
Yeah.
plenty of us in this middle space.
And when you add on, whether it be family or friend
Mm,
influences, my family are very successful in their chosen fields, whether that be teaching or flooring. They're all incredibly
right.
successful, and you look at that and go, oh my god, that you want to try and match that.
That's
And when you're
interesting.
not comfortable in who you are and you don't know who you are as a young, because you're right, I am only 24. So as a young, teenager, young adult, and you're looking to your family and seeing how successful they are, it's like, I want a part of that. I want a piece of that. How do I get that? And then you've got the societal, you
Hmm.
know, pressures as well. And I think it comes back to, if you're not confident in who you are, then that becomes a really murky place to sit mentally.
That's really interesting, because that seems like that would be a very double-edged sword. On one hand, you're seeing family members who are excelling at what they do, who have reached a certain level, who are clearly very skilled and capable at their particular field, and that's in its own right inspirational. But at the same time, as you say, if you are in that murky headspace, you're not particularly confident in yourself, and you're kind of forming an idea of who it is that you are. And then you've got that sense of, well, I need to get to this certain level because my family members are here, here, and here. That's very tricky to balance, I imagine, that sense of inspiration and not particularly intentional, but external pressure just through their positioning.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And it can get pretty dark at times, especially when you've got that than that inbuilt personality trait of perfectionism.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you try and go above and beyond to prove yourself to your family as well, which is sad because you shouldn't have to,
No.
you know,
Those are the
prove who
people
you are.
that should be and usually are most understanding. But I feel like when you do have a real sense of perfectionism and you are struggling with a sense of confidence and your own identity, I mean, I can only speak from my own experience. I tend to catastrophize, or at least I used to. And so the things that I'm thinking people are thinking typically aren't that. I'm just kind of blowing it out of proportion. But at the same time, in that moment, you can't kind of shrink that down to a logical understanding of like, no, they probably really don't care too much if I don't pass this, or if I'm not that, or I don't do that. But yeah, difficult to kind of balance.
Yeah, very, very true. Yeah, they're probably thinking, oh, just as long as you're happy.
Yeah, exactly.
That's all we care about. And in your head, you're going, no, but they're
No,
probably
it's
thinking
not though,
this.
is it?
No.
To dig into your past history with perfectionism, and you mentioned codependency earlier on. What is it that you feel kind of, do you know what initially spawned like perfectionist impulses and that kind of way of thinking? Was it
100%.
intrinsically internal, or was it through other people?
So I will speak from my own personal experience. When I had gotten out of when I had hit, I hit multiple rock bottoms in my lifetime. So, and I'm only 38 years old, which kind of feeds into the perfectionism and the perfectionism leading me there. But when I had hit my rock bottom a few years ago, I had started to do a lot of work on this perfectionist part of me. And I knew I was had codependent tendencies ever since my therapist had brought it up to me in my 20s.
Right.
And I had done a lot of work on that, but still was not understanding the entire picture, because these are things that unfortunately you can't talk yourselves out of.
Yeah.
If that was the case, we would all wake up and say, I would not be this way. And then poof, it would happen and I wouldn't have a job. Right. But when I think back to when I was a little girl, I had grown up, my parents were divorced and my mom had struggled with drug issues, and I was parentified at a young age. So when I was on this healing journey a few years ago and I really started to examine the role of that part for me, I had a writing and I couldn't find it, but I was going to share that. But the gist of the writing was, if that part was not there for me, at 7, 8, 9 years old, then the mask would be blown off and maybe people would see like how fucked up my home life was.
Okay.
And honestly, how much I disliked myself and felt unloved, and that I wasn't important, or that I wasn't worth, having two parents, or worth my mom's to get better. And it was all of this really loaded stuff, that it was the mask that was easy for me to go into school and get straight A's and get those 100% and get that positive attention. And if the mask was ripped off, people would see all of this ugliness and self-hatred and really a fucked up and sad existence underneath.
Yeah.
And you don't know that as a child. All you know is, this makes me feel better.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm going to keep doing that. It's the acceptance versus rejection.
That's interesting, because you don't have, I guess, the analytical skills and scope to realize that's what it is, but it is just a case of almost instantly soothing. Like, this 100%. Is making me feel better. So I'm going to keep doing this because this is what's kind of keeping me afloat.
It's the dopamine hit, if I would have taken that away as a kid, then I would have had maybe no positive attention, the attention from teachers. And then when I started dancing, when I was in early teen, that was a perfect environment for my perfectionism, right? With like having my body needing to be a certain way. And then I had a natural, skill and ability, and it just fed that beast.
Yeah.
But it was also a safe space for me, right? To get out of the turmoil that was my home. School was a safe space for me. So I became highly perfectionistic, academic, overachieving. All of these kind of fall under this umbrella of codependency.
Mm-hmm.
And that became my way of living. And it wasn't until I really sat down and looked at what would I be if that part wasn't there, was life-changing and also very, very painful.
That is, from an outsider's perspective, having not lived your lived experience, that's very curious that you consider it to be, one, your safe space, but it also seems to feed the things that were not necessarily good or healthy or productive for you long term, but in that short term, that momentary thing of this is good for me, without realizing that
Oh,
further
that
down the line it might not
100% on
be.
the paper, like, was a me, right? And that's as young as when you start getting grades, when you're in, first grade or so, you're 7 years old, and to get that, oh, yay, I'm doing again the right thing. Like, I'm being a good girl. I'm getting attention. My teacher likes me, so that everything felt comfortable there, much more so than it did in my home environment.
For sure.
And that's when I look back and I see, like, if I wouldn't get 100%, that internal turmoil, like the anxiety that would build up in me, oh no, like, what did I do wrong? And then self-blame and that inner critic that comes in. It's just like, why are you so stupid? Why couldn't you do better? It was a vicious cycle, but that's something about understanding the parts of you, is that they're there with a loving intention. And my perfectionism honestly allowed me to get to where I'm sitting today. When you ask me who I am, and I have a lot of lists of things that I could go into, because I'm not just one thing, because of that internal drive and that internal need. So there's a healthy bittersweetness with your relationship with the perfectionism.
Yeah, this all sounds so very familiar. Yeah. This
Well,
rings
we're all
very
going to be
true.
preaching to the choirs, right? In some
Maybe,
way, shape, or
but the
form.
thing is, if that is the case, that's there's something healthy from that as well, because even if it's not helping someone particularly kind of move forward, at least it gives them that sense that, hey, I'm not the only person dealing with this, or I'm not the only
100.
person who's felt like this.
Yep.
And that in its own way is very, very helpful, even if you're not
Yes.
making any individual particular progress. Just having that reflection and realization that you are not in this vacuum,
right, I'm not alone,
is amazing. Yeah, absolutely. And that goes across the board, perfectionism and otherwise. In terms of societal pressure, being a younger person, being within Gen Z, this is something that I'm very interested in, because I look from an outside perspective at what your generation has grown up with and what they are growing up in, and the stuff that's happening now. So I'm thinking like 24-hour news cycles. I'm thinking more awareness of climate change, more awareness of people with disabilities, more awareness of different cultures. With that, and with social media, which is, again, in its own right, a double-edged sword, a great tool to be used for forming connections, for gaining understanding, sharing knowledge, stories, etc. But with it comes a sense of peer pressure and external expectations in itself. Do you feel society that you've kind of grown up in, that has kind of formed any sense or driven any sense of perfectionism, if it's been like a catalyst for those perfectionist traits?
I do definitely think it's played a part in it, especially like you're saying, social media,
Yeah.
and especially seeing more in film and television of the standard, the ideal standard of what a human being looks like,
Right.
how a human being acts, how they conduct themselves, all those kinds of things. When you see the standards presented on social media, it, as a disabled person, it can get very tricky, because you're trying to work towards that, because it's like, oh, that's the acceptable standard,
Right.
and I need to try and match that. But how do you match it when you're born who you are, and you realize that everybody is unique in their own way, and that standard is not achievable for anybody. But when you get in your own head as a disabled person, you go, oh, well, I can't achieve that, but I'm going to try anyway. And it's almost that unreachable standard.
What I'm interested in, especially, is the metrics of success have changed somewhat in terms of social media as well. So obviously, success in terms of online ventures, in terms of online presence, in terms of just sort of brick and mortar businesses and establishments, but have an online presence, anything that you kind of throw yourself into that is an endeavor that can be promoted and sort of put online, has its own set of metrics now, whether that be like subscribers, downloads, views, etc. As someone who is starting a business, or who has started a business, and who is sort of been grown up with the internet age as it's blossomed, how, if at all, has that kind of been a catalyst for your perfectionism?
I think, especially, you know, Facebook came about around the time where I was just starting primary school.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
Thanks, Rhi.
I know.
I was already feeling old before this conversation, but thanks.
Sorry.
No, it's all right. It doesn't take much.
It also makes me feel old. It's like everyone just discovering
Oh,
Facebook,
get
like
out.
it's been around since I was like, yeah. But no, it started then, and I
Mm-hmm.
obviously did not have an account until I was 12 or 13. But the my circle of friends, or the people I went to school with, were very much already on board with it,
Yeah.
and they were starting to develop their level of worth and themselves based on that follow account, based on how many friends they had, based on how many likes. And I definitely started when I had my own social media accounts, that if I didn't, I could see people who I went to school with getting more likes and more comments on their posts, and I was getting next to nothing,
Mm-hmm.
and compared to them. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, something's wrong with me. Okay, well, I need to try and
Right.
change
Yeah.
who I am, which then you then become someone who obviously you're not, and then you're not proud of.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be very, very challenging. And then when you're, especially now, starting to grow a business, and I mean, I've run a blog as a hobby for the last 3 years, and trying to grow that follower base, you can very easily attach your success to
Mm-hmm.
that, how many followers there are and how many people are reading your work, or you know, how many people are inquiring about your business.
Right.
And when you see the number that you're not happy with compared to others, then you start going, oh well, you sit there and you one post on social, you'll sit on it for 3 hours not posting it, because you're tweaking, going, it doesn't sound right, like,
Yeah. It's
oh,
yeah.
this. And there's no, you can keep tweaking and tweaking and tweaking and tweaking, but as I'm getting older, I'm learning that perfect does not exist.
Right.
It's the idea of perfect is what you have associated with it, which is not. You might put it out and go, oh, that is absolute trash, but then someone else might comment going, wow,
Mm-hmm.
brilliant, and you go, what?
And that's the thing that you've scrutinized and agonized over, going, well, it's not right. It's not right yet. It's not right. Keep going, still not right. And you can chisel away at it, but then you get that, and that's wonderful. It really pleases me to hear that you have come to that realization, because I'm still dealing with it. And I am like 14 years your senior, Rhi, to age myself. It's difficult, because truly it is an abstraction. It is not a real thing. But if you have had, as you mentioned earlier, like a sense of confidence issues, if you struggled with your identity, if you struggled with what it is that you want to do, whether that be with your life or your career, just in terms of whatever it is, if you've struggled with that, it can be hard. And I'm just speaking from my own experience, to detach from that sometimes. But it's really pleasing to hear that you kind of have that realization. I imagine you still struggle with it, where you still are like, this isn't right, it's not where it could be, it's not good enough. But at least you are like cognizant of the fact that someone out there is going to like this, someone out there is going to get something from this, and that you can kind of let go of that a little bit.
Yeah, I definitely, it's still very much a prominent thing still. The idea of perfectionism and being perfect and it needing to be right. But like you said, it's once you're aware of it, once you become more mindful of, here it is, like, this is why I'm stumbling on not launching my business, not
Right.
posting that blog post, not posting that reel. Once you go, here it is. Okay, well, why am I struggling with this? What am I not liking about it? And realizing, hey, it doesn't, just as good as it can be, and what you've got in front of you probably is great.
Yeah.
and you will tweak as you go, and you as a person and in your business, it's constantly evolving and changing, and it will grow as you grow.
I'm curious because we kind of touched upon the idea of changing a little bit, and one of the issues or the topics that we're talking about in this episode is performance, about the idea of tweaking not so much who you are but how you present yourself.
So I knew that if I went to school and behaved in a certain way that maybe led to curiosity, or if I was, not well kept in any sort of way, or I was acting out, maybe people might get curious about what was going on at home. And growing up in the home of an addict or an alcoholic, you base your whole life on this don't tell, don't ask, don't feel mentality that no one ever necessarily told you. You just knew. And so that performance was protective of, my family and what was going on, because I didn't want to get anyone in trouble, because I didn't know what was going on at 7 to 9 years old, but I felt, right, that something is off here. So it became this, like I said, my perfectionist and my overachiever are paired together because of the role that they served for me growing up, that then became non-productive in adulthood, because you can't be everything for everyone. And you can't base your worth and happiness on what other people think of you, because you can't control what other people think of you. And so that's a very dangerous. When I went to college and, I got good grades, I was near the top of my class on honestly not a lot of work, because I grew up in Southwestern Pennsylvania. I'm not sure how great our school systems are, but I had a natural intellect, right? And I had that perfectionism and that overachiever that were driving me. And then when I got to college and I didn't know how to study and I didn't know how to be in the world in that way, to start getting C's and D's, that was probably my first, one of the first nervous breakdowns. I think I had a few in my teenage years too, depending on what was going on. But to have that, what had served me for so long, that performance for so long, be stripped away, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I started, partying or drinking to numb out in some way, because I could not figure out what I was doing wrong. It was hitting on that not enoughness wound in me. And it was a complete revelation to my life that I couldn't achieve something that I was 100% working hard for, and it wasn't working out.
In the early stages of you putting your business together, have you kind of had to have a word with yourself at times and kind of talk to yourself and be like, this doesn't feel authentic, this doesn't feel like me, this feels like I'm trying to lean into something that I know is successful? Or you kind of catch yourself at any point and be like, it just doesn't feel true to who I am and what I'm trying to do. It feels like I'm kind of almost pouring myself into a mold that might be a bit more acceptable in your head, at least.
Yeah, countless times, especially in the early stages of writing my blog. I started it in 2020, during the height of everything that was going on, which must not be named. I call it Voldemort. It's like, it must not be named. But especially in the early stages, I was writing it, and my views and what I was trying to put across, I noticed that I was trying to word things in a way that pleased certain members of the disability community who were still angry towards the abled society, who, and were angry with their own diagnosis. And I've been there. I lived that. I went through that phase as a child and as a teenager. And so I resonated with that. But as a result, I was like, oh, I don't want to be shunned by my own community. So I'm going to write how they would want me to write, or I need to be extra careful with this.
Yeah.
And there were certain conversations that I had looking back now in hindsight that is not what I stood for.
Right.
And sort of looking back going, oh, I wish that I'd just been upfront and honest and said, well, actually, do you know what? Yeah, I am the unlucky duckling with a disability, because it is hard, and owning up to the fact that disability living is hard, and it can be really, really sad and heartbreaking at times. There's nothing wrong in saying that.
No, absolutely not.
But instead I was going, oh no, everything's great. I absolutely love it. Life is amazing. Because it was the minute you said anything negative, it was, oh, you must be ableist then. And it was, no, not at all. This is just how I felt. So I suppressed that. And then other times there'd be stuff that I would go to post. I've got a big draft heap on Notion of all my blog posts that I'm wanting to do. And there are several that are like in big block, do not post. And they will probably never see the life of day. I think because they are incredibly personal and they impact other people.
Okay.
And if I was to post it,
right,
I'd not only have to think about myself, but I would also have to consider everybody else who could be affected and my relationships that could be affected by that.
Yeah.
So there's such a fine line when you post stuff in being authentic,
right,
but also not being completely almost narcissistic and going, I don't care, I'm going to post whatever I want to post. There's such a balance. But yeah, there are times where it's like, oh, what do I do?
That's really interesting, because there is a fine line, and it is a really difficult balancing act between trying to be as authentic and as true to yourself as possible. But if other people are kind of in that sphere of impact and influence, once the work is out, once the post is up, whatever it is, that's difficult. And I can totally understand you pulling back on the reins with that a little, for sure.
And I think half of them too are sitting in there, I've just like ranted, something's rubbish has happened, or I've had a conversation that was painful, and I've just sat there and ranted, and you read it back and go, yep, that is going in the trash.
Yeah.
That is not being published.
But the thing is, there's something definitely cathartic about that, even if just getting it out of your system and not making it for public consumption. I think there's definitely something healthy to that, for sure.
Yeah, 100%. And I found writing as a healing for me, and definitely cathartic, especially in my own acceptance journey with disability. Being able wonderful. To put your thoughts and feelings onto a page, whether it be on a laptop or on a physical piece of paper, it does a lot of healing for you, because you can almost take a step back and reflect.
Yeah.
And then go, okay, where do I go from here?
Is there a point that you can remember where realizing that you can survive the not enoughness, where you can make mistakes, where you can drop your grades, where you can dip below that expectation that you have for yourself, or you think other people have for yourself? Do you remember a time when you did and it stopped hurting so much and it stopped throwing you into a sense of confusion?
I will say, if the honest gut response is no, because when the academia was taken away, then it went into the work environment, right?
Okay.
Like, I'm going to overwork. I'm going to have no boundaries, work-life boundaries. I'm going to sit here, and a way that my perfectionism will come out, especially as a psych nurse practitioner or just in everyday life, is like reading, rereading, writing, rewriting, like going over things over and over again, especially when I started my psych nurse practitioner job, because then those what if thoughts, well, what if I send this off and it doesn't match insurance? And then what if I get sued? And, documentation is everything. So
that's interesting.
That
the pressure gets higher.
Well, you just find different avenues for the perfectionism will find a different arena to play in. So where it wasn't academia anymore, it was, and I was like that in all arenas of my life. I wanted to be the perfect girlfriend, the perfect daughter, the perfect friend. I mean, being and giving to toxic people, like, well beyond what should have ever, how that relationship should have ever gone. So it always found different avenues. And then being like, almost like a training junkie, wanting to learn the next thing, to still touch on that little bit of academia, because that was something that was so ingrained to that perfectionism and that overachiever to make me feel good. And it wasn't until I had a complete breakdown a few years ago that all of this started to make so much more sense. Because the way I was running was, I would have run out of steam very, very quickly. And I had a million times. But this was like the one time that it was like, all right, bitch, you got to wake up, or you cannot live this way forever.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to hear that it's got to that point for you to have that realization, I suppose. But I suppose most people go through that. You can't I would say it's seldom that people kind of go through these things unscathed and then come to a
Mm-hmm.
realization.
Right.
It's kind of like baptism by fire of sorts.
Yes. Mm-hmm. That's a great way to put it. It's, to me, it was, I had to burn everything to the ground, my whole sense of identity. And that's what codependency is using external. When people hear the word codependency, there's so much confusion about it.
Right. Yeah. Please lean into this, because I want to clear this up for people that don't know, or just kind of give a layman's baseline.
Right. So codependency is not I feel like what people think of it is like dependency or like love addicts, which sometimes can be applicable.
Yeah.
But truly codependency is not having a true sense of your own self. It's using external things to fill that bucket. So things like I was saying, academia or my relationship or being the best friend, you're using those external buckets to almost create this false sense of self, because underneath all of that, you don't feel lovable and you don't feel good enough just for being you on your good days and your bad days. So it's using all of these things that you essentially cannot control because you have an extreme lack of self-love, self-worth, and self-identity, which can often and most times stem from childhood or adolescence, or through having really difficult, abusive or psychologically manipulating relationships.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I wanted to clear that up, because I feel like that is one of those terms that probably does cause a bit of confusion, and people kind of maybe jump to the wrong conclusion. So yeah, I just wanted a layman's baseline for that.
Right.
Would you mind diving into your history with codependency a little bit?
So a lot of codependency, how it was first understood, which is why people might think of it in this way, was through the world of like Alcoholics Anonymous,
right?
Where this was in the 60s and 70s. And when AA members were having meetings, they were doing studies on the family members, spouses, and children of the people who were in the meetings. And they had found that they were similar in all these traits and behaviors to be almost fixers and rescuers and martyrs, and the need for control with the people that were experiencing the substance use. So that's how codependency first got keyed in like the 80s, was through this relationship or semi like toxic dynamic between someone who suffered with substance abuse and someone who was a caretaker to them or was in their network. Now, obviously, that's applicable to how I grew up, because my mom, struggled with substance use and my dad was not there. But really, how I have learned to understand codependency is that it's the formation of what we call those like negative self-cognitions or inner child wounds or exile wounds. I'm not enough. I'm not worthy. I'm not lovable. I don't matter. We all have them. It's all of those negative little things that we tell ourselves. And through that, if that becomes a repeated theme in your life, then it's these habits and protectors and ways of being that helped fill that need or fill that void as you were growing up, that then become not appropriate, or they're not efficient in adulthood, or they're not necessary anymore, because those that chaos is not necessarily happening, but your nervous system is already kind of conditioned to choose the old habitual behavior. Right.
Yeah, you just kind of automatically almost lean back into that.
Old habits die hard, and our brain is wired a certain way, and it strengthens those pathways so that you don't have to necessarily think about it. Your nervous system's job is to keep you alive and to keep you safe in some way. And if that wound of I'm not enough is the most painful thing you've ever been through, it's going to do everything it can to keep you away from that wound. Therefore, the perfectionist overachiever mask comes on, right? If I prove myself and I get straight A's, or my boss loves me, I have a great report, I do this podcast and I'm getting like killer ratings and killer comments, right? Then I am enough, or I matter, or whatever. Again,
or
that cognition is for you.
Whatever that reward would be internally.
Exactly.
We talked a little bit earlier about parts and separation. I want to know about Barbie, because we talked about this a little bit off air during our correspondence, and this is curious to me. I think this is really fascinating.
So the way that internal family systems style therapy works is we're all a compilation of parts, and there's no bad parts of us. albeit there are some there that can have a destructive impact. So things like procrastination or anxiety or, panic attacks or drinking, smoking, whatever to numb out. But all the parts serve that purpose to keep you away from that wound. So when you start to understand what parts make up, we all have these voices inside of our head that are talking to us all day. And we talk to ourselves more than we talk to any other person in the entire world. So what we say is important, right? But there is, in amongst all of that, all of those voices that are going on inside of you, there is one true self. So your true self is almost the, like the core. It's the sun that's behind the clouds. You know that the sun is still there. You just might not be able to see it, right? So when you're sitting in a trait or sitting in your sense of self, you're feeling calm, you're feeling confident, you're feeling like you can take risks, you're being compassionate to yourself and other people, right? So anytime that you are not thinking or feeling that way, you're probably blended with something. And these are survival mechanisms. So how you start to separate yourself from that is learning about the parts that make up your being. And so when I was learning how to externalize that part from me, because that is not the true me, it's just a part of me, right? Having something that you can see or something that you can have a visual of, or even something that you can touch, it helps to put that part away from your true self and that separation. So how I did that, and the visualization that came up when I was working through my perfectionist overachiever, was exercise Barbie. I don't know why, but I knew what an exercise Barbie looked like. And that, like, yeah, go, let's do it. We can do this. We can do everything. You can do it. You can achieve it. And that's not at all my personality.
Right.
So when I started to look at that, that's something, right, that's tangible in my brain that I could even buy an exercise Barbie if I wanted to and have it here. And so when I feel the thoughts coming in, so the thoughts associated with her would be like, you need to check that. You didn't read that the right way. You got to do that again. Almost this like a little bit of OCD-ness, right? Checking, rechecking.
For sure.
How that feels in my body is a lot of sympathetic energy. Like my heart's, I'm going through the compulsion to stay busy. I'm going through my papers. Again, I'm reading, rereading. So, and those go into her behaviors, right? So when she's blended with me, I can feel that stuckness. And again, when we go back to your sense of self, I'm not feeling calm. My brain is not clear. A lot of C words. I'm not being compassionate towards myself because she's yammering at me, telling me I need to do better, be better, right? So it's taking that pause and just going, that's not me. Barbie is here. Okay, that's enough of a separation because you're distinguishing between the true self part. And then how do I unblend from that? So a lot of the time is asking and having these internal dialogues with yourself, or even out loud. What is she here for? What is she afraid of? Oh, she's afraid that if I don't write this note the right way, that maybe insurance will audit me and I might get in trouble. And then it's all the layers under that. If I get in trouble, what does that mean about me? How might these people judge me, which is a trigger for me? And then all of it, once you go through all the layers, if I didn't do it the right way, then that means I'm not enough. There's the wound.
All right.
So once you sift through all the questions and really understand in that moment, and a lot of times, and by a lot, I mean like a vast majority, 90-some% of the time, the part is there protecting younger you, not you and your adult self. Because my 38-year-old self says, well, if I submit a claim or I submit this and it's not right, then I can own up to that. I have insurance to cover it. And honestly, like, I don't really care. Like, I don't need to write the note perfect to know that what I do with my patients is really good work, right? I don't need that to be some sort of qualifying factor. So that's my adult brain. But my child brain is going, oh my God, but what if someone judges me, right? I'm not going to feel enough.
That's really interesting how it is like essentially protecting the part of you that hasn't got the experience and scope to know that these things truly don't matter in the grand macro of it all. And you are protecting that younger part of you.
And I know it sounds like such a woo-woo way to talk about but it has been monumental in my healing process to know that this isn't me. This is a part of me.
Yeah, no, it sounds fantastic. Like creating that separation and being able to have it's something to cognitively go to separate
Mm-hmm.
and to address and realize it's not me, it's a part of me.
Yes.
And it's doing it for this reason.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great stuff.
Because you're human and you're not perfect.
At this point in the conversation with both Rhi and Jess, I wanted to ask some questions that I found from a thing called the... hold on a second. What is its actual name? The Frost Multidimensional Perfectionism Scale. The actual scale itself consists of a whole bunch of questions. I can't even remember how many, but there's a lot. And it's also broken down into different categories. And yeah, it's pretty dense. I say questions, they're not really questions. They are statements you are asked, and then you have to agree or disagree. Now, on the actual scale, I believe it's a range like 1 to 4. Strongly disagree, strongly agree. That's how I believe the scale itself works. It has an actual point system for the sake of time, for the fact that I'm not qualified, and just to make it a bit more of a fun podcasty thing. I condensed it into 2 categories with 4 statements each. Don't know why my cadence has just gone off, but it has. And just for fun, I thought I would answer them as well. So the statements, do you want to do old you first and then see where you are now?
You can. I actually wrote out the answers to them, so
you did?
I'll say Barbie or that I still agree.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right. So the statements are: I set higher goals for myself than most people.
Barbie.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I set higher goals for myself than most people. Would you agree or disagree with that?
Agree.
I would agree with that. I have extremely high goals.
Still agree.
Okay.
I still feel that's applicable.
Mm-hmm.
Agree.
I would also agree with the statement of I have extremely high goals.
Growing and changing is so important.
Yeah.
Life's not meant to be static. So
and that's
yeah,
definitely, it's not a toxic trait at all,
No.
having high goals. It's a good thing. It's your approach to it that can be toxic.
Exactly.
Other people seem to accept lower standards from themselves than I do.
Oh, can I be in the middle?
Yeah. Yeah, you can take a neutral stance at any time. Because I think that is something that is, and this is the thing with this, agree and disagree, again, is setting 2 very extreme poles, and some of these you will definitely be one or the other. But with some of them, there is a gradient, and some days you might be closer to agree, some days you might be closer to disagree. I suppose it's circumstantial and where you are and what's going on in your life. So yeah, absolutely, you can take the middle ground with that. For sure. Other people seem to accept lower standards from themselves than I do.
Barbie.
Yeah, probably agree. I expect higher performance in my daily tasks than most people.
Barbie.
I expect higher performance in my daily tasks than most people.
I'd probably say agree.
Okay. Yeah, again, I probably do agree. So these are the really interesting ones. A lot of these don't particularly resonate with me, so I'm curious as to how other people respond to these ones in particular. If I fail at work/school, I am a failure as a person.
100% Barbie.
Excellent. I'm very pleased to hear that.
You asked me 5 years ago, I would say 100%
Okay.
agree.
Oh, wow. Okay.
think-
So age of 19, you would have been on a strong agreement with that. But where you're at now, at 24, less so.
Yeah.
Okay. If I fail at work/school/whatever, I am a failure as a person. Completely disagree. Big, strong, whopping, chunky disagree for that one. If someone does a task at work/school/what have you better than me, then I feel like I failed the whole task.
Barbie for sure.
Wow.
That was a lot of that, and that comparison part too that comes in.
All right. If someone does a task at work or school better than me, then I feel like I failed the whole task.
Disagree.
Okay. Has that ever been an agree? Kind of looping back to that earlier stage, like at 19?
Definitely when I started uni, my first year or 2 at uni, and I was struggling with how to study law moving because I didn't take a gap year from high school.
Yeah.
And I was seeing all, the more mature age students getting high distinctions on their essays and their exams, and they showed me their work, and I'm like, what am I doing here? I may as well just quit.
Yeah, uni, especially in your first year, is a tough one. And it's something that I don't think people get told as much as they should do in advance, that your first year of uni, I think whether or not you have perfectionism, you are going to feel some degree of imposter syndrome. Like, as you say, what am I doing here? I feel like that is a pretty strong thing for a lot of people, except for those that are uber confident and know exactly what they're doing. And, I don't have time for them people. They can answer their own questions. If someone does a task at work / school / whatever better than me, then I feel like I failed at the whole task. Again, great big honking disagree for that. Doesn't bother me if someone does better than me. People did better than me all the time at school. I knew where I was at an academic level. I know where I am with my own skills and abilities. The person that I'm competing with all the time is myself. All right, your next one. If I do not do well all the time, people will not respect me. Agree or disagree?
I agree.
Okay. Do you feel that is a part of your personality trait, or do you feel like that's something that has, as we were talking about, come with having disability? Do you feel like that's kind of been reinforced with that? Because we were talking about like that societal expectation, you're either at one point of the scale or you're at the other.
I do definitely think it's a bit of both. I think society plays a big part in that, but also, again, probably that ingrained, oh, well, I need this or I need that. So yeah, I think it's a bit of both.
Okay. If I do not do well all the time, people will not respect me. There's a little bit of agree in that, for sure. If I do not do well all the time, people will not respect me. Yeah, a little bit of agree. I don't know how much, but yeah. And it's not really a case that I care if they respect me or not. Certain people, absolutely. But in general, in the general sense of the population, it's just whatever. If I do not well all the time, people will not respect me.
Barbie.
All right. I'm keeping those mistakes in, by the way, to combat perfectionism.
Yeah, see, look at that. That's him working on himself. I love that. All of our fumbles.
And then I suitably, the last one is the fewer mistakes I make, the more people will like me.
That's a Barbie one too.
The fewer mistakes I make, the more people will like me. There is more agree to that than disagree for me. And again, it's kind of more within a sphere of certain people. So if I'm starting a new job, that definitely applies. When it comes to friends and family and loved ones and people who I respect, yeah, that's a big one. That's where a lot of my people pleasing tendencies come out. The fewer mistakes I make, the more people will like me. And I guess it kind of lends itself to this as well, which is why my perfectionism has really kind of drilled into making this podcast. I've had the idea, whether it's conscious or subconscious, that the fewer mistakes I make when piecing this together, the more people will like not necessarily me, but it, as in the podcast. So, yeah, the fewer mistakes I make, the more people will like me.
Disagree.
Okay. Cool. I'm pleased to hear that. I like hearing disagrees on these because it makes me, I know, just happy to hear that people are in a sort of more strong, clear mindset of their own self-worth without that sort of validation that comes from other people,
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely been a big work in progress for me, especially the last, say, 3 and a bit, 4 years of that self-worth journey. There's been so much that has happened and conversations that I've had to have and things like that, where I've gotten to the point now where it's like, do you know what? I know who I am and I know my own person. And if I make mistakes are what grows you as a person.
For sure.
As well. You learn more from your fails and what you do, your wins anyway.
Yeah.
And people will admire more that you didn't keep yourself down on the ground for too long, and that you got back up and you went again and you learnt and you've grown. People will respect you more for that, and admitting when you've mucked up and apologized where you need to, and grown from that.
Really, the only one I still agree with is setting high goals for myself, which I think is important for self-propagation and improvement.
Well, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. We can always be working on ourselves in one way or another, or working towards something, whatever that might be. But I'm really pleased to hear that most of those are attributed to Barbie and not current day Jess.
And that's how I know these are great. I loved when you sent these to me. I said, oh my God, this is exactly my old way of thinking. That's exactly how Barbie, when she comes in, those are, if I fail, then what will people think of me? What will I think of myself? And what a dangerous place that is to be in. Right? And because we can't control that.
And that dangerous place can then become a spiral, which it's not good.
Which, like I said, I've had a million spirals in my life, and I hopefully not continue to have them as deep or as long, but those are the moments that you grow out of.
It seems, and please correct me if I'm wrong, but I have a funny feeling I'm not, that you are in a much better place in terms of your journey at this stage with your perfectionism and with your own identity. Is that fair to say that you're at a much better point in your life now with this?
Oh, 100%. And I think I owe a lot to doing a lot of equine assisted therapy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah.
How's that helped?
It's essentially therapy, but instead of just sitting in a stale psychology room, you're dealing with a coach and who's got that counseling background, and you're talking, but there's a horse. You're interacting with a horse, and you're learning equine husbandry and equine behavior, and studying the horse language, the horse body language, energy, learning energy transference, how to use your energy to move the horse, how to bond with it. And that's a very healing, but also can be confronting as well, especially if you're in a place where you don't want to deal with the skeletons in the closet, so to speak. But working with horses has really helped me shift my mindset and my viewpoint on who I am and finding who I am, and healing a lot of wounds that I needed to heal from my past, and also getting to a place where I feel strong enough and more capable. Strong, you know what I mean? Strong, I guess, in every facet of the word, but but capable to back myself in when I need to, and to know that everything will be okay in the long run, and to stick with it. But also when things get tough, just to take a step back and breathe. And once you watch horses long enough and see how they go through struggles, and it's amazing to watch how they do it with such calm and such ease. You then start translating that into your own life.
That's truly fascinating. I did not expect us to take this turn, but that is genuinely really interesting. That's something to consider if you are in a particular place where you're looking to do some work.
I highlight for everybody, disabled or not, if to go and spend time with a horse in a round yard or in a paddock, honestly, and you're open to receiving, because they're a mirror. They will mirror back.
Yeah, I've heard
what you've got going on. And that, to me at the time, was like, oh my gosh, like I can't handle it. But that was healing in itself. Like it's such a long process, but so worth it. I recommend it to everybody.
Excellent. Okay, well, you heard it here. From Rhi. Highly recommended.
I'm only human. I'm not perfect, just a person.
All right, so there you go. That was my conversations, plural, with Jess Parente and Rhi Anderson. A huge thank you to both of them for coming on and talking to me and being very open and transparent and vulnerable about their experience with perfectionism. If you look in the description box, the show notes, the place where all the text and the links go, you can find a link to both of their individual projects. To Jess's project, It Ends With You, and to Rhi's project, Living Abled. Both of them fantastic projects. You should definitely dive into them, learn more about them, and interact with both of them. Again, though, huge thank you, ladies. It was great having you on. And at some point down the line, I would love to dig into your individual stories further. And on that note, that pretty much does it for this week's episode. As always, thank you for tuning in. Next week, we're going to be diving into a murder mystery of sorts, vampires, and COVID, which all of that is linked to my return to acting for the first time in about 2 decades. Yeah, quite a strange time in my life, I won't lie. And that's it. That's the hook to entice you into next week's episode. Murder, vampires, and COVID. And yeah, quite an abundance of anxiety, which, is always fun. As always, thank you for listening. Look after yourselves, look after each other, and until next time, keep it dimed out.
You're not perfect, sport.